Today we will look at events that occurred in Norris City, Illinois. 22-year-old Jacob Wheeler and his girlfriend, 17-year-old Jessica Evans, went to the Little Wabash River to go fishing. They have not returned home, and their families have not been able to contact them. Police were notified of the couple's disappearance the same day, and an investigation was launched, which was followed closely by all Norris City residents. But unfortunately, the story had no happy ending. What happened shocked all the locals. Between Kentucky and Missouri lies a patchwork of rich farmland and dense forests known as Southern Illinois. The landscape is dotted with small villages like Norris City in White County. With a population of just over 1,000, it's a great place to raise kids. Because it is a small community, many people enjoy outdoor activities such as hunting. There are plenty of places where people enjoy fishing. In 2012, 17-year-old Jessica Evans was living in a cozy house with her mom, Chris. Right before the start of summer vacation at school, Jessica met 22-year-old Jacob Wheeler, who had recently moved to live across the street at his brother's house. They met at a party, got to talking, and really liked each other. Jacob was a quiet country boy who was getting back on his feet after serving 3 years in Iraq. Even though Jacob was 5 years older than Jessica, her mom, Chris, wasn't too worried about it. She trusted him. It was August 26, 2012. Jessica asked her mom for permission to go on a fishing trip with Jacob to the Little Wabash River to fish at night in a well-known spot. Chris didn't like the idea at first, but Jessica was able to talk her into it, and Chris relented. She asked her daughter to be careful and not to stay out too long. Jessica's older sister, Megan, and her son, Miles, lived on a neighboring street. The next day at 5 a.m., Megan had to go to work, and Jessica had to watch her son. So before Jessica left to go fishing, her mom, Chris, reminded her that she had to be home no later than 5 a.m. Jessica replied that she remembered that and would be at her sister's house by then. But Jessica had no way of knowing that this fishing trip would be her last. Shortly before midnight, Chris called Jessica on her way to bed to see how she was doing. Jessica said she was fine, and that she and Jacob were almost done fishing and would be home soon. But at 5 o'clock the next morning, Chris realized that her youngest daughter never came home. Being late was not at all like Jessica, especially when she knew she needed to babysit her nephew. Chris picked up her cell phone and started calling her daughter, but Jessica didn't answer. Text messages that Chris wrote went unanswered as well. Chris immediately realized that something was wrong. She was sure that if Jessica had a change of plans, she would have warned her. Chris went to Jacob's house, but his brother Jeremy said Jacob hadn't come home either. Jeremy wasn't worried because he knew Jacob could take care of himself. But by 9 a.m., Jessica's family was beginning to fear the worst. Chris thought Jacob's pickup might have broken down, or they were stranded somewhere. Finally, after 12 hours with no sign of the couple, Chris called the White County Sheriff's Office. Sheriff Doug Meyer was relaxing at home when he received a call Sunday night about the missing couple. But Meyer wasn't too concerned. He speculated that perhaps Jacob and Jessica had run away. He figured they were probably okay but needed to find out where they'd gone. The sheriff decided to execute a warrant to search Jessica's cell phone so the phone company could trace it, but that could take hours. In the meantime, the sheriff's deputies, following the family's instructions, headed to where Jessica and Jacob were supposed to be fishing. It was a very isolated area with only gravel roads leading to it. The deputies followed a 50-foot-long overgrown path to a well-known fishing spot. There were obvious signs that someone had been there. There were some packages. However, there were no signs of any trouble or crime there. There was an extinguished campfire, but the area was really clean. There was no sign of Jacob's pickup truck. So far, the sheriff's gut feeling about the young couple had not failed him. His first thought was not that something bad had happened. It did seem to him that they had probably gone somewhere of their own free will. Finally, the sheriff's deputies got the records from Jessica's cell phone carrier. A great way to find them was to try to track the phone and see which tower it was closest to. They found that the signal was coming from a tower in the campground area. That meant that Jessica's phone was still on and was somewhere near where she and Jacob had gone fishing. It wasn't at all what the sheriff expected. If the couple had just run off, why weren't they answering their phone calls? Investigators began to fear that the two were stranded somewhere, seriously injured, or worse. The news that Jessica and Jacob were missing spread quickly through Norris City, causing concern among the locals. Some thought maybe they'd just run away or something, but Chris was sure Jessica wouldn't do that. And when the sheriff's office learned that her cell phone was still in the area where the couple had gone night fishing, they had an uneasy feeling that something terrible had happened. At dawn the next day, officers from the White County Sheriff's Office returned to the fishing site, along with neighboring law enforcement agencies and a platoon of volunteers. The search party set out to look for any sign of Jacob and Jessica. Their families also participated in the search. After 3 hours of searching, there were no results. Neither Jacob, Jessica, nor the pickup truck could be found. Yet even if something happened to Jacob and Jessica, the pickup had to be there. But what if they dumped the phones and ran away? If they did run away together, sooner or later, they'd leave an electronic trail. The police checked their bank cards to see if there had been any payments, but there was no activity. While there was nothing of significance in the bank statements, one clue turned up in Jessica's phone records. Police knew about the midnight call from her mom, but apparently, Jessica had another phone conversation immediately afterward. That was around 12:30 a.m., Sunday night. Investigators were able to determine who the number belonged to. Jessica was talking to a young man named Ron Wooderson. That name was familiar to the police because Ron had previously had some trouble with the law. So that in itself made the investigators suspicious that he might have had something to do with it. And so, they decided that they needed to talk to Ron and determine exactly what that conversation was about. Sheriff's deputies met with him and asked him to recount the last time he spoke to Jessica. He eventually admitted to calling her in the middle of the night. He said that he had been at the party and that there had been a few other people there. Ron claimed that he had called Jessica to try to get her to come and meet him at the party. Jessica was just telling Ron that she was busy fishing when Jacob grabbed the phone. Jacob had strictly forbidden him to call Jessica. According to Ron, they had a pretty heated conversation, mostly on Jacob's part. He really didn't like that Ron called his girlfriend. Jacob was pretty upset about this call. The sheriff's deputies took down the names of the other partygoers and checked Ron's alibi, and they kind of vouched for him, saying that he didn't leave after that phone call and that he stayed there. By the end of the day, the tired members of the search were about to go home without finding anything. But one of Jacob's friends, who was riding his ATV, found a pickup truck in the woods. The pickup was parked behind an old abandoned farmhouse, 2 miles from where Jacob and Jessica were fishing. It was Jacob's pickup. It was clear that something terrible had happened. In the back of the truck was the body of a woman. She had been shot twice in the head. Another cause for concern was the condition she was in. She was partially clothed, and some of her clothes were lying on the ground next to the car. This immediately led investigators to believe that more than just a murder had occurred. The victim had no ID, but in a community like this one, that wasn't necessary. Some of the investigators had known Jessica all her life, and it was Jessica they had just found. In that moment, everything changed. Nearly 36 hours after Jessica failed to show up to babysit her nephew, the sheriff's office found her shot to death in Jacob's abandoned pickup truck. She was wearing almost no clothes, leading to the obvious conclusion that she had had contact with a man before her death, and that it was against her will, if that was indeed the case. Authorities hoped the coroner would be able to collect the perpetrator's DNA. Meanwhile, police officers scoured the area around the pickup truck for evidence, and they got lucky. There were 2.22 caliber shell casings, consistent with the fact that Jessica had 2 head wounds. The shell casings were found on the right side of the truck, next to a large bloodstain. It was obvious that Jessica had been shot where the pickup truck was parked. Investigators began to examine Jacob's pickup truck. It was full of fishing gear and personal items, but the strangest thing was that Jacob wasn't there. Police officers got a clue when they looked inside the pickup truck. They found blood in the driver's side cab of the truck. Blood samples were sent for DNA testing. They needed to figure out who it belonged to and to find Jacob. The police couldn't help but wonder if Jacob was another victim, or if he was the man who had shot Jessica. Police officers continued to comb the area, trying to find Jacob. At that time, they had to consider him more as a suspect. It wasn't just the investigators who had doubts. Part of the community believed Jacob had something to do with what happened to Jessica. Many speculated that Jacob, after years spent in the army, had been trained to take someone's life. Perhaps it was that late-night phone call from Ron that set Jacob off. Investigators began to worry about what kind of mood Jacob might have been in if he thought he was going to lose Jessica. The day after Jessica's body was discovered, police obtained a search warrant for Jacob's brother's house, assuming he was hiding there. They found no sign of Jacob but made an important discovery. Investigators noticed that one of the guns was missing from his collection. Jeremy, Jacob's brother, explained that this was no cause for alarm. His brother was simply taking precautions before a fishing trip. There was nothing unusual about it. However, investigators became alarmed when they heard that the missing gun was a .22 caliber, matching the shell casings found at the crime scene. This raised some serious concerns. Jacob's family believed he was not involved in the crime. They were certain that Jacob would have sacrificed his own life to protect Jessica if she had been in danger. As the week passed, the search for Jacob Wheeler turned into a large-scale operation. Police officers from several counties formed search teams and took all possible measures to find him. K-9 services were involved in the search, and an airplane was taken into the air for surveillance. The White County Crime Suppression Unit put up a reward of $2,000 for information leading to Jacob's capture and arrest. The cash reward generated some interest, and the sheriff's office began receiving calls with tips. One tip stood out from the rest. There was a report that Jacob had been seen at a gas station. An employee at the gas station located 12 miles from where Jessica's body was found reported that he believed Jacob had bought a pack of cigarettes Sunday night, about a day after he and Jessica disappeared. He was wearing a camouflage hooded sweatshirt. The gas station employee remembered that when the man pulled cash out of his wallet, there was also an ID card there, and it appeared to him that it was an ID card in the name of Jacob Wheeler. This obviously made Jacob the prime suspect in what happened to Jessica. As time went on, the possibility that he was on the run became more and more likely. Investigators went to the gas station where Jacob was allegedly seen. They looked at the surveillance footage and saw a suspicious man. He was wearing a hooded sweatshirt that covered his face and never looked at the camera. The night was too hot for a warm jacket, and it was suspicious, but it was hard to say for sure that it was Jacob. The man quickly bought cigarettes and left. The surveillance footage from the gas station didn't show the man's face, but a second camera outside showed him getting into a car driven by a woman. It was a woman one of the sheriff's deputies recognized. They immediately drove to her house. The car they saw on the gas station's camera footage was parked near the house. While talking to investigators, the woman admitted to driving the man to the gas station, but said it was not Jacob Wheeler. She said it was her boyfriend. The moment they saw her boyfriend, it was a huge disappointment to them. It wasn't Jacob Wheeler. It was just someone who looked like him. The mystery man in the video was a dead end. All of the police's attention remained focused on Jacob. The detectives were convinced he was alive and suspected that his brother Jeremy was hiding him. They searched his house at night, trying to catch him off guard. But despite a second search, they found no signs that Jacob was at home. After he disappeared, his brother and father were convinced that Jacob couldn't have taken Jessica's life. Harold Wheeler wanted to clear his son's name. It wasn't easy because he was sure he was looking for Jacob's body, not himself. 6 days after the disappearance, Sheriff Meyer received a call from Jacob's father, Harold, saying that he had discovered something that everyone else had overlooked. He said he thought he saw some car parts in a wooded area just a quarter mile from where Jacob and Jessica were camping. Investigators decided to check out this information and indeed found some car parts. These were parts that attached to the fenders of the pickup truck. In the area where they found these parts, there was damage to the trees, and it suggested that someone drove the pickup into the woods and drove between the trees, causing damage to the vehicle. But it certainly wasn't Jacob Wheeler's pickup truck. The investigators didn't know if the find was connected to the crime, but it was definitely of interest, and they had no other leads. One of the parts had a serial number on it. By checking it online, the police were able to determine exactly what kind of pickup truck it was. Again, in a small city, it's not hard to find where this truck might be located. One of the sheriff's deputies knew a man who drives a vehicle like this. It was Danny Costin, a 36-year-old electrician and White County native. But could he have been involved in such a violent crime? Danny had never been a troublemaker. He had no criminal record. He was a regular White County resident and easy to find. Investigators decided to go to Danny's workplace and talk to him. His pickup truck was parked in the parking lot. The truck had significant damage that matched the parts found in the woods. While the investigators scrutinized the pickup truck, Sheriff Meyer questioned Danny. He asked about the damage on his pickup truck. Danny explained that he had tried to fish on the Little Wabash River, but had trouble launching the boat because he was heavily intoxicated. He didn't remember most of the evening, but he did remember the date. It was the night Jacob and Jessica went fishing, and the time was about 1 a.m. He said he never saw anyone else in that area of the river the whole time. He was there. Meanwhile, investigators made an important discovery. They found quite a bit of blood in the back of Danny's pickup truck. He seemed surprised when they told him about it. The sheriff told Danny that if there was something he wanted to tell him, now would be a good time to do it. Danny stated that he was in the woods that night and saw Jacob shoot Jessica twice, but that didn't explain how there was blood in the back of Danny's pickup truck. Analysis showed it was human blood. Investigators brought Danny to the police station and questioned him again. He said he was drunk, went down to the Little Wabash River, and saw Jacob and Jessica. Jacob had gone into the woods, so he was alone with Jessica. Danny said Jessica allegedly started hitting on him on her own. He said he and Jessica sneaked off in his truck and parked 2 miles away behind an old abandoned farmhouse. They allegedly had consensual intimate contact. But then, as Danny claimed, Jacob found them in the pitch darkness. He and Jessica started arguing, and then Jacob shot Jessica. According to Danny, he was scared when he saw Jacob coming toward him. He was able to grab him, and a struggle ensued between them. Somehow, the gun went off and wounded Jacob. Danny claimed that the shot was accidental. He began to panic and put Jacob in the back of his pickup truck. He was afraid that no one would believe him that it was self-defense, so he hid the body where no one could find it. Danny described in some detail where he had left Jacob's body. The police didn't believe Danny's story. It didn't seem like something Jessica would do. Danny's story of Jessica going with him and Jacob showing up out of the blue didn't really make much sense. But now they knew that Danny had shot Jacob, which meant that Jacob's family had been right all along. Danny Costin was arrested and taken to jail. At that time, the investigators went to the area where Danny said he had left Jacob's body. It was a dirt road, and they had to go a little deeper into the woods. After 6 days of searching, they finally found Jacob with a bullet in his head. The evidence they found didn't match what Danny said happened that night. There was blood inside Jacob's pickup on the driver's seat and the door, and that blood belonged to Jacob. It just didn't fit Danny's story. He said that Jacob killed Jessica, and then they fought in the woods, and Jacob died from an accidental gunshot. Danny had previously stated that he put the body in the back of his own pickup truck, and drove it to a remote location. So, where did the blood in the interior of Jacob's pickup truck come from? Danny Costin began to be reinterrogated, and when inconsistencies in his testimony were pointed out to him, he agreed to tell the truth. According to him, that night he tried to drive his truck to the water to launch the boat, but the woods were too thick. He was also very drunk. He saw Jacob and Jessica and tried to get them to help him. Jacob saw that he was drunk and said it wasn't a good idea. Danny then asked the couple to help him get home. Jacob agreed. Jacob and Jessica got into Jacob's pickup truck, and Danny climbed into the back. He had a .22 caliber pistol and, for some reason, decided to use it. He climbed out of the back of the truck, went to the driver's door, and shot Jacob in the head through the lowered window. It all happened in front of Jessica. She was frightened and started screaming. Then, according to Danny, he pulled Jacob out of the truck. During questioning, he swore he didn't know why he killed Jacob or why he did what he did. Afterward, Jessica told Danny that she would do anything to keep him from killing her. The sheriff asked Danny if Jessica had offered to become intimate with him in exchange for him letting her live. He replied, "She said she would do whatever I wanted." He went to a secluded place. Thus, he essentially interpreted Jessica's attempt at self-preservation as an offer to become intimate with him. He did it in the back of Jacob's pickup truck. He then drew a gun, and despite Jessica begging for her life, he shot her. He claimed he didn't know why he did it. After putting Jessica's body in the back of Jacob's pickup truck, he drove his own truck to Wayne County to hide Jacob's body. On the way, he threw his gun and Jacob's gun out the window. Police were never able to find either gun. On September 4th, 2012, Danny Costin appeared in court and pleaded not guilty. He decided to recant his testimony and claimed he was not read his rights before being questioned, but an appeals court rejected his appeal. Video recordings of the interrogation confirmed that Danny was read his rights. Plus, police had overwhelming evidence to corroborate Danny's confession. His truck had Jacob's blood in it, and Jessica's body had his DNA on it. In January 2014, a jury found 31-year-old Candace Brown, Danny Costin's girlfriend, guilty of lying to authorities during the initial phase of the investigation. She provided Costin with a false alibi. Brown was sentenced to 60 days in jail, 30 months probation, 100 hours of community service, and ordered to pay various court costs and fines. On August 20th, 2013, Danny Costin was found guilty. He was sentenced to 53 years in prison. Judge Tom Foster said he was bound by the agreement of the state and defense in sentencing Costin, but he felt the defendant deserved a harsher punishment. The court believes you executed these two people. There is no forgiveness or excuse for that. Not in this world or any other, the judge said. Costin agreed to waive a jury trial in exchange for lesser charges and a reduced sentence if convicted. Foster said the court only accepted the agreement because the victims' families had consented to it. After the hearing, Jacob's father, Harold Wheeler, said he never believed his son, who was identified by law enforcement as a person of interest in Jessica Evans' death, was capable of such an offense. "I knew he would never do something like this. I started looking for him Sunday, and I never stopped," he said. He added that Costin was an acquaintance who lived about a mile from the Wheeler residence, and his arrest for the murders was unexpected. "I've sat at his campsite and drunk a beer with him. He's been in my house," a visibly pained Harold Wheeler said of Costin.